This is our Chef Liron Cooks series, and we are at Land of Milk and Honey for Shavuot. And today I'll be making Blitzes. And I'm here at the Mirage JCC in the Stern Family Teaching Kitchen in the Blaise Bernstein School of Culinary Arts. I'll be recording this, and we have one more person joining us. I hope all of you have received the recipe. If you need it, just email me or send a message here letting us know that you need to get the recipes. I have muted everyone, but if you have any questions, you can either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions. So we are going to get started. I feel like I'm doing a little less than I normally do. I tend to pack a lot into these. But it'll give a little bit of time to go through the process and step by step and not rush as much. So I'm actually going to start with the batter for the crepes. So basically we're making blitzes and we're making it out of the dough that we're going to use to fold it is a crepe batter. And I have here for that, we have flour. I have milk and water. I've already combined them together in the measuring cup just to have a few less dishes. Salt and eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the eggs and the milk and water. Now everything here is in room temperature. So I've had the eggs sitting out for a little bit. It'll help cooking the batter. You don't want it to be cold. All right, so I'm going to start with the eggs and the milk. I just want to break up the eggs a little bit and whisk it. All right. And next we're going to add the salt and the flour. Now for the flour, I've sifted this flour to prevent the clumping a little bit more. The flour will always clump a little bit because you're taking a small amount of flour into a large amount of liquids, but sifting it will help prevent some of those clumps. You won't have as many. And that's also part of the reason that we're going to now let this batter sit. So I'm going to mix it up as much as I can. It will have some clumps of flour left, but we're going to let it sit and we're going to go ahead to the next step. And then the flour will absorb some more of the moisture and we'll have less pieces of flour. And at the end of the day, if you have a few small pieces of flour, that's okay. All right, so we want to make sure that all of the flour gets out of the whisk. Get it all mixed in.
Liron, I have a question about cooking with eggs.
Yes.
I read when I was making a French toast casserole that I needed to whisk the eggs very, very, very well for them to really fully incorporate to each other so that the whites and the yolk were not separate. And then I more recently made a frittata recipe that said barely whip the eggs because somehow it makes your frittata more rubbery.
So what happens when you whisk the eggs, or it's more the egg whites? This is going a little bit more into science. You have the proteins and they will start connecting, and then it will, because the frittata doesn't have any other binding things, it's only the eggs basically with whatever else you're adding, the vegetables and stuff that you're adding to it, then the egg whites tend to be rubbery. If you're going to mix it up a little, you're loosening the proteins and they're retying to each other in a different way. But for pancakes and other batters, because you're mixing it with other ingredients, it actually helps because you're opening it up, getting it ready to mix together with all the rest of the ingredients.
Thank you.
This is why we learn culinary science in the beginning of school. And also one of the reasons, if you want to whip egg whites, they will whip better if they are at room temperature. So that's why when you make French macaroons, they'll be more stable as well. When you make French macaroons, you want to use room temperature egg whites and not cold egg whites. Okay, so now that I have finished mixing all this together, there are clumps. So I don't know, Julie will try and zoom in. We do have some clumps of flour there, but we're gonna let it sit here. You can see on the whisk, there's a little piece of flour. We're gonna let it sit while we make the berry sauce, and then we're gonna come back to this. So that'll give the moisture some time to get into that flour.
My crepe recipe that I've used previously uses the blender. Does it matter between the whisk and the blender?
So the only thing that's going to happen if you use the blender, and this goes to making these kind of mixes, ganache, other things like that, your blender will incorporate air, which will make it more fluffy because you'll get more air in it. You can definitely use it. I would use, if you're using an immersion blender, use the lower setting if you have, and just do it just until it's incorporated. Don't overmix it because it will incorporate a lot of air into it. Okay, so next we are going to work on our berry sauce. And here you don't have to use these berries. You can use whatever combination you'd like. I'm using all the berries. So we have blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries. What I've done for the strawberries, I've cut them into slices, except for, yes, we have here slices, not too big. And if the strawberry was really big, so I went ahead and I took that slice and I just cut it in half. So we have a container of strawberries, it's 1 pound, and then 1 container of each of the rest of the berries. And we're gonna go ahead and just mix it all together. So we're adding the blackberries, the blueberries, and the raspberries. This yet? And we're just going to gently toss them. Oh, I see, I missed a leaf. And I've rinsed all these ahead of time. And we wanna just gently stir these. The main berry that will get hurt first is the raspberries, but most of this is going to turn into our sauce. So we're gonna, once this is all stirred together, I'm going to take it and I'm gonna eyeball 2/3 of this and put it into our pot. All right, and we're leaving about 1/3 of the berries out. To the berries, I'm going to add 2 ingredients. This. We have sugar and freshly squeezed lemon juice. All right, so we're gonna add the sugar. And our lemon juice. Right, and I'm gonna turn that on. And we want this to be on medium heat. We're going to bring it to a boil and then we're gonna let it cook for a while. As soon as it starts heating up, the sugar is going to start pulling all of that moisture and the water out from the berries. And you're gonna see it looks kind of dry right now with the sugar, but it's going to get a lot more liquid. And we want that to bubble. We're pretty much gonna let it simmer. And it's going to first be very watery, and we want to cook it for about 5 minutes until that liquid is more of a syrup consistency. So by letting it simmer, we're cooking it down and we're making it thicker. Keep that up. A little higher. All right, so what we're going to do here, we're going to cook this. It'll take about 5 minutes. And once the syrup is once it's thicker and we have more of a syrup consistency, we're going to put it into the blender and we're going to blend all of these together. So this is really just going to be the sauce base of it. And then we chill it and we're gonna mix it with the rest of these berries. So you get both the sauce and you get some fresh berries that are mixed into it. Now, after we've blended it, some of these berries have a lot of seeds and we don't want those seeds in our sauce. So we're going to strain it. Now, my strainer here is not a very thin strainer. You can use a strainer and a cheesecloth. Depending on how many seeds you really want to try and get out of it, you can strain it a few times. You can use 2 strainers, one into the other if you want. We're going to use this one this time. I kind of prefer a bit of a bigger strainer so we don't have to move it around too much. And we're going to basically push it through with the spatula just to get as much of the liquid out without getting the seeds. We're going to push the seeds around the strainer to get as much of it out. And now all the sugar has dissolved into the liquid and it's pulled out all the moisture from the berries. So you can see now we have liquid in the pot. And the berries are looking glossy now that they've gotten that coat of the liquid. So we're just gonna cook this for a little longer. Now, when you're making these at home, if you do wanna make it ahead of time, you can make the crepes and fill them with the filling and assemble the blitzes, and then you can freeze them. You don't have to cook them right away. They do need an additional cooking. So here in this recipe, I'm going to be frying them in butter.
A lot of butter, by the way.
But you can also, if you would like to avoid that, you can arrange them in a pan and bake them. They won't get as crispy, but you do need to cook it some more. So the filling also has eggs in it. You want to make sure that the filling gets cooked. And it also helps the texture of the filling. You'll see once I've mixed it, the filling is very thick. And then once it gets cooked, it'll be a very smooth, creamy filling. I think Julie may have to eat a few more.
Things we do for our jobs. Sacrifices we make.
So if you are going to be making them ahead of time and freezing them, go ahead and cook them frozen. So you want to take them right out of the freezer and cook them once they're frozen. You don't have to thaw them out. That's just going to make them a little softer and probably harder to handle.
It is amazingly liquid.
Yes, there's a lot of liquid that comes out. It's, blueberry. Yeah, blueberries surprisingly are nice and green inside. They're not blue inside. Yeah. So you see there's a lot of liquid that's come out of that, starting without no water. So this is really just all the liquid that's coming out of the berries. So it is very watery right now. We want to cook it down a little bit, get more of a syrup consistency. And I'm going to be using 2 pans today. So I'm going to be using these. I'll talk about that a little bit. So these pans are a Scan Pan and they are non-stick. I could maybe try for you, Julie. I can try cooking a few without any butter.
Let's try it. But can you take the pans separate? Because when you couldn't, they were both black. You couldn't really see them. There is a question.
Yes.
You mentioned crepes and you mentioned Blitzes.
Right. So the end result is Blitzes. Blitzes is a filled crepe with the cheese mixture. Crepe is just the dough circle. So we're not making an authentic crepe. It's not going to be that big crepe that you then fold, but that is the batter. So we're not doing, it's not a pancake because it's a lot thinner than a pancake. If it doesn't come out as thin as a crepe, that's totally fine. But the batter itself is basically a crepe batter. We're going to be using the smaller pan for that. And then once they're assembled, we're gonna fry them inside the bigger pan. You could use a bigger pan It all depends on the size you want to finish with. I think that the smaller one is comfortable. With a bigger one, you won't reach, the batter won't get all the way to the end, or it could, it'll be very big. But this way you're also going to be always consistent. You're going to get the same size for all of the crepes. So it'll just help with the consistency. Okay, so we have this bubbling right now. So these scan pans are non-stick. It's a really good non-stick. So I'm actually not going to use any spray or any butter or anything while I'm making the crepes. They won't stick at all. Once it's cooked enough, it'll be very easy to loosen it off and flip it over. You really don't need anything to add to it. And cooking sprays usually hurt non-stick pans. So if you start using cooking spray, the whole idea is that you won't need to use the cooking spray and you don't need to use the butter for it to be non-stick. And once you start using it, it actually hurts the material that makes the pan non-stick. And if you then stop using it, it will start sticking. So if you do have non-stick, it's better to at least start using it without any spray or anything.
So you're referring to Scan Pan. Scan
Pan is just a brand of these pans that I got them at Shavuot. But this is just this specific non-stick pan. As opposed to regular non-stick pans that are usually very smooth, this one isn't smooth. It has texture to it. So it doesn't give you that, when you use non-stick, when you do like an egg directly on non-stick, it usually comes out like really rubbery kind of, and like glossy because of the texture on that pan. These are meant to imitate using just like butter on a pan and stuff like that. So I finished cooking this. And you can see that it is a much thicker consistency. All right, and we're going to take this whole mixture and put it into the center. I have to get it all over myself.
So are you saying with all nonstick pans do not use Pam and spray?
It's better not to use it, but if you've already been using it, don't stop. But yes, because that's it. It's basically you're using something to make it not stick, which is the material that the pan is already made out of. And most of the pans, if you look at their packaging, a lot of them will say not to use spray.
I feel like I have to go buy all new pans.
I'm just going to turn this on for a few seconds. All right, and we just wanted to get that all blended. It will still steam very liquidy right now, but as it cools, it will thicken. I'm just using the spout here. And this makes about 2.5 cups of sauce. 2.5 to 3 cups of sauce without the whole berries that you're then going to mix into. Right, so now basically the reason that it's stopped and it's not going down anymore is because that the seeds are blocking all of the holes. So I'm just going to gently with a spatula kind of move the seeds around a little bit. I don't want to push them through. I just want to move them around so that the liquid can go through. All right, just a little more all that liquid out. All right, you can see at the end, it's really just all of those seeds. All right, when you get to the end, all those seeds can go into the trash. All right, and we're gonna put this into the refrigerator. Okay, so next we're going to start working on our crepes. So I have the mixture here that we let sit a little bit. And I don't know if you can see, maybe try zooming into it. So right over here, you see there's a pocket of flour that kind of just started popping already and getting that moisture into it. So I'm just gonna give it another stir to try and get the rest of those flour clumps out. And again, it's totally okay if we have some. Okay, now while I'm doing this for a little longer, I'm going to heat the pan up a little bit. And when you're making crepes, it's a bit delicate. So you want the pan to be warm, but you don't want it to be too warm. So because we're not using, when you make actual crepes, there's this special machine. It's like a T-shaped wooden thing that smooths out the batter, makes it very thin and pushes it all the way to the sides. And we're not using that. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pour the batter and twirl it around the pan. So you want it to be warm because you want it to actually stick and cook, but you don't want it to be too hot because then it will cook and be too thick and you won't be able to spread it all around. It will stay thick and it won't be able to cover the whole surface of the pan. So if you see that they're starting to set too fast, just turn the temperature down, hold it for a few seconds before you pour the batter in. After the few first ones, then you will get the hang of it and it'll start being easier. All right, so most of these clumps are out. And I'm going to prepare a pan next to me, lined with parchment. And I'm going to set the crepes onto here after they're done. I'm using a measuring cup to scoop out the mixture. You don't have to use a measuring cup. You can use a small ladle if you have a small ladle. But it helps me kind of gauge how much of the mixture I'm going to use. I think I say on the recipe a quarter cup. It really will depend on the pan size you end up using. I'm not filling the quarter cup all the way. All right, so we're gonna get started. So I can feel that the pan is hot. And this is going to beep every time I take it off. That's totally okay. And we're gonna start. So I'm pouring it to the center and I'm rotating the pan to get it covered. And you can see the chunks of flour. We're not gonna notice once we're done. So you rotate it as much as you can. And if I would have let this sit a little longer, then we wouldn't have had as many clumps. All right. And I'm going around just to loosen it a little bit. And this really was only a few seconds. And we're gonna flip it over. So I only went around the edges to loosen it up. And that's it. We don't need any spray for this or anything. This side, again, we're only doing for a few seconds. And then we can take it off. We really don't want it to get brown. Right, so now we're going to the next one and I'm going to take it off for just a few seconds before I put the batter onto it, just so it's not too hot. And again, we're going to pour and rotate, getting that nicely covered. And I'm just going up the edges a little bit to use all that batter and get it nicely and thinly coated. Loosen it up a little bit around the edges. Once I see that it's cooked enough, just lift up the edges and flip it over. I'm gonna make 2 piles and I'm going to move it around. I'm not gonna completely cover each pile directly one on top of each other. All right. So I'm using a little less batter this time. Maybe not enough. Add a little bit to cover these holes. What happens for trying to use a little less batter?
I'm glad to see that happens to chefs as well.
No one's perfect. All right, so we just want to give it a little bit to see all that just set enough and not be liquid. Flip it over. We're gonna make a few more before we move on.
Yes, Julie's pointing out that most of her recipes say only to cook one side of crepes.
Well, I'm really only flipping it over for a couple of seconds just to get that side cooked a little bit. I don't know, I've always seen 2 sides. But the only thing I can think about that is that if you're only gonna cook one, you'll probably, that side will probably get browned. If you want to cook it through, it'll get brown. And here, there's still very, nothing's brown. It's very, it's all cooked, but it's very pale, yes. Right. So after this one, I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to assemble a few. We're going to make the filling and we'll assemble them and then we can come back and make the rest of these.
How far in advance can you make the crepes before the blitzes themselves?
So you could make the crepes ahead. If you're going to make it that day, once they've come to room temperature, I would wrap up the tray with plastic wrap. Just to make sure that it doesn't dry out. And if you're gonna make them more than a day in advance, you have to put it on a tray that you can then put in the freezer. And again, you wanna make sure that you plastic wrap it well enough so that it won't get any moisture in it. You don't want any ice in it.
And my experience from watching Liron is when she says to plastic wrap it, she really means to plastic wrap it.
Yeah.
There are lots of layers.
You do it from both directions. All right, so we're gonna make the filling. For the filling, all right, we have here ricotta cheese, vanilla extract. Heat up the butter here a little bit. Sugar and 1 egg that I'm going to separate. And I'm adding a little bit of orange zest as well. All right, so we're going to put all the ingredients.
So what's the difference between ricotta and ricotta salata? Did I stump the chef?
Yes.
Oh, I won. I won the competition today. I stumped the chef. I will look up and let everyone know.
Yeah. All right, so we have the ricotta, and now again, this is in room temperature. We don't want it to be cold, and the egg here is also in room temperature. Sugar.
Can you use farmer's cheese?
Yes. You use farmer's cheese as well. I have to microwave that. All right, we're gonna warm that up a little bit. All right, and our egg. So I'm going to separate this egg. And yes, beware, if your egg is room temperature and then you're cracking it, they crack much easier. You don't want your egg to break on your counter.
I did not know that.
Both the shell will break easier and the yolk will break easier. So you'll have more chances of breaking the yolk. Yes, it's just perfect. All right.
We lost a light.
All right, I'm gonna mix that together, and we have here our melted butter. Okay. Right. And the last ingredient is orange zest. You don't have to use the orange zest. I just feel like it adds a little bit of flavor to it. And I'm just going to use a little bit. So we're going to take it, and I need to use my right hand, my dominant hand with the zester. And I'm just going to get a little bit of that zest. I'm using it upside down so that the zester will hold the zest in it. And that's it. It's really not a lot. That's about half a teaspoon there. All right, we're gonna mix that in. Okay, we want to get all that cheese mixed in. I'm just going back and forth to open up some of those pieces of ricotta and make sure it's all nicely incorporated.
Monica is my research assistant today.
Okay, perfect.
And she discovered that ricotta salata is Sicilian and salted. I also believe, Monica, it's
don't use that for Blitzes.
Yeah, please don't use that. I think it's also a harder cheese.
Yes, it's a little harder. I just looked it up. Like 7 things while I'm watching. Sorry.
No, thank you, Mon. I have a lot more questions, Monica. You're so good at research. I'll just start throwing them out there.
No problem.
All right, so now that we have this all mixed together, we're going to assemble these 5 Blitzes. I have enough crepes for 5 right now. Take that out. And we're first going to tie it for Julie without the butter. All right, so we're going to turn this on. We're going to heat this up a little bit. And I'm going to use a spoon. And it really depends on the size of your crepe. And I'm going to take some of that filling and I'm going to put it on top. And it's kind of at one edge, but in the center. So what I want to do is I want to be able to put both edges, 2 sides over the filling, and then we're going to fold that over and keep on folding. Now, if you can try it and if it will be fine and will stick and stay whole, you can not use anything, but I'm actually going to go ahead and get a little bit of water and just with my finger, I'm gonna seal the top off just a little bit to make sure it doesn't open on me. All right, and we're gonna start frying it with this side down. Okay, and the next one. And again, we're gonna fold sides over while I'm holding them with some of the fingers. I'm using my thumbs to fold over that top lip and then rolling it over. If you want it to be flatter and wider, you just need to make sure that your fold is wider. If you want it to be thinner but a smaller piece but thicker with more of the filling inside, you can just roll it up a little tighter. It really just depends on your fold. So this is a flat fold. We'll show you. I'll do the 2 examples. Right, and now for the next one, I'll do it a little rounder. So we're taking the filling. It all just depends on how you seal it. This reminds me of making rolled cabbage with my mom.
And your bubby.
Well, my mom made it with my bubby. So I'm tightening it and making it more rolled. And now this is actually going around more times because I've made it tighter. So you can see the height. So this one is higher because it's rolled tighter and it's also narrower. I didn't press down the filling as much. All right, so this is hot now. Let's go ahead and try this.
So if you heard, Lirona's recipe calls for frying this in butter. She's gonna try a version for me to see without butter. It's an experiment. We'll see how it goes. But we all know that the ones in butter are gonna be much more delicious and decadent.
All right, does anyone have any questions? I'm gonna keep on making these.
So Liron, we talked about cooking these in advance in different ways and freezing them, and then you would fry them frozen, you had said.
Yes.
So how would you eat these immediately? Is this something
So I would serve them warm. Yes, 100%. I mean, they're just delicious. But you can also make them ahead of time. And then like if it'll be like an hour or so ahead of time, and then just warm them up in the oven just a little bit just to get them warm, and then serve them. You can definitely do that if you wanted to. But they're so good warm, and then the sauce is going to be cold or room temperature, so that'll kind of go with it. You don't want to surprise your guests too much and give them a really hot filling that they'll burn themselves. We don't want that. Okay, let's see. And I'm going to use both the tongs and a spatula kind of to help me flip it without it falling apart. Let's see. Okay, I mean, it's a little pale.
Looks good to me.
After this, we're gonna add some butter to this pan. Right. All right, and then also for the butter, I'm gonna put a nice amount of butter in here. You don't have to put that much butter in it, but you do need to keep an eye on it, because if it's a smaller amount of butter, the more you cook in it, it will continue heating up and cooking, and the butter will brown. So you may need to switch the butter halfway through. The thinner the layer of butter is, the quicker it will brown. All right, so we're gonna take these out. They actually seem pretty good.
Yes, they do.
And I'm gonna add butter.
Yum.
And I'm using here, this butter is in room temperature, so it'll just melt.
Salted, unsalted, do you
Unsalted.
care? Unsalted.
Unsalted. All right. So we're really gonna have a nice layer of butter here. Okay, let that all melt. All right, so we're gonna cook these 3 crepes and then Blitzes. And then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna start doing crepes. If anyone has any more questions, you are welcome to ask. We do still have the last part, and that is to add the sauce. We'll add the sauce as soon as these are cooked. All right, so I'm just twirling it around a little bit because the pan is still so hot because we've already heated it and cooked these crepes. I just don't want the butter to stand still and to brown in any area. So I just want to make sure all the butter here is melted. I'm just stirring it around a little bit. Now we can add these.
So Liron, I think we're gonna have a minute. Why don't you tell us what's coming up next? What are the upcoming classes?
Coming up next, well, I'm at the selling hall next week. We had a little vote going on, and we're gonna have an additional flavor. I'm gonna also make churro challah. So we're gonna have a traditional or roasted tomato or churro challah available to purchase next week. You can go on our website and order them. The following week, I'm going to have the challah class. We're going to do it outside in the Holocaust Garden. So we're going to be doing either traditional or chocolate chip. And then we have Memorial Day. So we have a family class coming up. We're going to be grilling ribs, Korean style ribs, with some grilled vegetables. We're gonna have a nice festivity out by the pool here at the J, so it'll be a nice day for families or anyone who wants to come and enjoy the outside. Hopefully it'll be beautiful out. And what else do we have coming up? Oh, then we have June. June, it's not a, yeah, maybe June 3rd, whatever that Thursday is. We're going to be doing on Zoom again. We're going to be doing shakshuka. We're going to be doing 2 kinds of shakshuka, a regular tomato shakshuka and a green shakshuka, an herb shakshuka.
I am very excited to try a green shakshuka.
Yeah.
It will balance my day of Blitzes.
All right, so we want to get it cooked on both sides. Just peeking. I'm a little impatient. I'll let it cook a little bit longer. I'm going to grab the sauce. So I have sauce that I've already made ahead of time. And I have these berries that we have as part of it. And I'm going to go ahead, and you can do 2 things. If you don't want as much of the sauce, you could add the sauce to the berries and not add all of the sauce. So you can just cook the berries in the sauce just enough, and then you can spoon on more sauce if you want it, or you can just pour all the berries into the sauce. So we're going to do that. Stir that together. These are ready to flip. They look beautiful. I could see that on the edges, they were already starting to get golden. All right. are sizzling. Right, and we're going to spoon some of this sauce onto here. Berries. Right. Few more seconds for these.
Would you typically, when you're not doing this in a quick hour class, let the berry mixture go to room temperature?
Yeah, I would a little bit. So I don't want to use the warm one, which hasn't had time to really cool, but yeah, I would do it a little more room temperature, not necessarily directly out of the refrigerator. Just so you don't have as much of a contrast. Right. Ooh, starting to ooze out there a little bit. Right. Now, since you've tried the ones with the butter, you're gonna have to try these that are not cooked in the butter and see if they hold up.
Well, if I have to. All right, I'm gonna try it without the fruit first.